Coca-Cola CEO says it may ramp up use of plastic bottles and raise prices due to President Trump's 25% tariff on aluminum imports. The beverage company currently imports aluminum for cans from Canada.
A single can of Coca-Cola weighs less than 400 grams. But if the entire system behind it disappears, that tiny can could become a crushing weight on the shoulders of tens of thousands of Americans, possibly even yours. Since 1886, Coca-Cola has been more than just a drink. It's a symbol, it's a job, it's a paycheck. But in 2025, that symbol is being pushed to the edge of leaving the very country that built it. For a reason that seems unrelated, aluminum prices have jumped by 150%. And if Coca-Cola is forced to leave, don't assume it's just the giant factories that'll be hit. The truth is, these 10 American cities are on the verge of crisis not because they'll run out of soda, but because they're losing something far more critical, the stability of everyday life. American Canyon, California. Not every factory makes noise. Some operate silently and steadily like the heartbeat of a community. The Coca-Cola plant in American Canyon, a small city in Napa County, California, is a prime example. For more than 3 decades, this place didn't just bottle cold cans of Coca-Cola, it bottled job security stability and an economic lifeline for the entire region. But in early 2025, a cold announcement was sent out the plant would officially shut down on June 30, resulting in over 135 full-time workers losing their jobs, not to mention hundreds of part-time employees, suppliers, transport companies, and auxiliary packaging businesses. And the most painful part, they didn't do anything wrong. They were simply swept up in the storm of surging aluminum prices and skyrocketing production costs that made operations unsustainable. American Canyon isn't a large city. With a population of just over 21,000, the loss of more than 100 full-time jobs is more than a statistic. It means meals get cut back, car payments are delayed, and sleepless nights begin for families who suddenly don't know what tomorrow holds. Many households had relied on the steady income from Coca-Cola, none of them expected to be filing for unemployment just as they were turning 50, and the ripple effects didn't stop there. According to local government reports, several nearby small businesses, grocery stores, gas stations, transportation services are now recalculating their future. Because when the region's largest employer disappears, so does the consumer spending that sustained these shops. Former regulars are now forced to tighten their belts. One local diner near the plant reported that its revenue dropped by 35% in just 2 weeks after the shutdown announcement. Even the city's budget took a hit. Tax revenue from Coca-Cola and related economic activities once helped maintain essential public services, road street lighting, and community support programs. Without this stream of income, American Canyon didn't just lose a factory. It lost a silent contributor to everything people took for granted. And if a city with a mild climate strategic location and more than 30 years of ties to Coca-Cola could be abandoned so quickly, imagine what's waiting for smaller towns where residents have spent their whole lives depending on just one bottling line. Durham, North Carolina. In Durham, there was a rhythm deeply woven into daily life. Every morning, before the sun had a chance to rise, the neighborhood near Junction Road would come alive with delivery trucks rumbling by, workers switching shifts, and the faint, sweet scent of the beverage plant wafting through the streets. Few realized that rhythm was what kept the entire community in sync. But in 2025, that rhythm was abruptly cut like a cassette tape being rewound and stopped mid-song. No more shift whistles, no familiar yellow glow at dusk. Just a strange silence that made the whole city feel off-axis. Durham hasn't collapsed, but it's lost its sense of direction. Because Coca-Cola wasn't just a factory here, it was the city's biological clock. When it stopped, so did 1,000 little things that seemed unrelated. The father who no longer works, night shifts the child who suddenly sees their mom home all day, the corner store that no longer sees the usual end-of-shift visits. But the deepest wound isn't economic, it's the feeling of being left behind. The people who work there didn't ask for much, they weren't chasing promotions or dreaming of some life-changing future. They just wanted a stable job, a predictable routine, and the quiet reassurance that they still belonged somewhere. When that's taken away, what's left isn't just unemployment, it's a sense of drifting. These days, Durham still looks calm on the surface, but under that stillness is a worry no one can quite name. People have begun to ask themselves if a brand that's been part of our lives for so long can just vanish without a word, then what is really permanent? It's a question no one expects an answer to, because deep down they already know they won't get one. And if a city like Durham, where daily life once moved to the beat of red cans, can be thrown off balance like this, what happens in places where Coca-Cola isn't just a routine, but the entire economic backbone? What happens when that pillar begins to shake, too? Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte has long been considered the hinge of the southeastern U.S. economy, a place where goods, services, and labor converge and spread out across neighboring states. But every hinge needs a pivot. And for Charlotte, that pivot has been Coca-Cola, not just because the headquarters of Coca-Cola Consolidated is located here, but because from this very city, dozens of distribution lines and thousands of daily orders are launched, reaching even the smallest corner stores in the Carolinas, Georgia, and Tennessee. If Coca-Cola were to leave, Charlotte wouldn't just lose a company. The city would lose its sense of motion. Everything would slow down, not in numbers, but in feeling. Coca-Cola's presence in Charlotte isn't flashy, but it runs deep like a nervous system quietly threading through the city. Walk through the southern neighborhoods in the early morning and you'll spot red-branded delivery trucks parked outside convenience stores. These trucks are so punctual that locals use them to tell time, but if Coca-Cola pulls out, those trucks will vanish, and for many that won't just be the loss of a brand, it'll be the loss of a sense of order they always believed would be there. In Charlotte, people don't say I work for Coca-Cola. They say I grew up with Coca-Cola. Because this brand didn't just put food on the table, it showed up in their first days of school, summer vacations, and high school hangouts. And when Coca-Cola disappears, people don't just lose a job, they lose the ability to continue a story that spanned generations. The scariest part is that even though everyone knows this could happen, Charlotte can't do anything to stop it. The decision isn't in their hands. And for a city once seen as the operational heart of an entire region, that helplessness feels like watching a train derail and knowing you can't reach the brake. And if Charlotte, the beating heart of an entire Eastern distribution network, can be left in such a powerless position, imagine what's quietly building in those forgotten towns that once powered America's industry, where each Coca-Cola can wasn't just a product, but a memory etched into the old brick walls of the factories that made them. Cincinnati, Ohio. If you ask the people of Cincinnati what image best represents the city's industrial past, they won't point you toward old steel mills or aging train stations. They'll take you to a red brick building with the unique Art Deco design that once appeared on postcards for nearly a century, the Coca-Cola plant on Reading Road. It wasn't just a production facility, it was a source of pride, a landmark from a golden era where over 500 bottles rolled off the line every minute under blinding lights, surrounded by the roar of machinery and the pulse of a thriving industrial rhythm. But today, that once proud place has become a forgotten symbol, like a fragment of memory faded beneath the dust of time and decisions no one in Cincinnati ever had a say in. If Coca-Cola pulls out entirely from this region, Cincinnati won't simply lose a brand. The city will lose another piece of memory. Again. And each time that happens, the belief in preserving the old values erodes just a little more. Because in Cincinnati, Coca-Cola isn't just a consumer product. It's a rhythm tied to tradition. Coca-Cola cans at Oktoberfest celebrations, on the lunch trays of public school cafeterias, in the fridges of Midwestern working families, from grandparents to grandkids. Generations here have grown up with its presence the same way they've grown up with the sound of church bells on Sunday afternoons. And if Coca-Cola disappears, this place will no longer be part of the American heartland. It will just be another forgotten stop where historic buildings are left to decay, where memories are boxed away in museums rather than lived out on sidewalks in people's hands in the cold cans passed down from father to son. No crisis ever begins with a bang. Often it begins with an absence that lingers, a delivery that doesn't arrive on time, a machine that no longer hums, a sign that no longer lights up. And then one day people suddenly realize everything has changed and no one saw it coming. And if a place like Cincinnati, which has clung to history with everything it has, can't hold on to a symbol that was once part of its lifeblood, then perhaps in regions where tradition is lived like a religion, such a withdrawal will leave gaps far more painful than anyone dares to imagine. Bogaloosa, Louisiana. Bogaloosa was once known as the town of scent. The smell of paper, the scent of wood, the trace of Coca-Cola all blended into an atmosphere that no other place in Louisiana could replicate. For the people here, the Coca-Cola plant preserved a fragment of urban spirit amid the spiraling decline of post-industrial life. It wasn't big, nor was it modern, but that plant, though long shut down, still lives on in the stories shared at barbershops and the proud glint of an eye when someone says my father worked there for 28 years. And that is exactly what makes Bogaloosa so vulnerable, because Coca-Cola doesn't need to leave town again. All it has to do is fade from collective memory, and that alone is enough to plunge this place into a void. When the last brand still tied to the feeling that Bogaloosa was once part of America disappears, what remains, beside the few rusted lampposts and crumbling brick walls, Coca-Cola's presence was once a quiet comfort for the generations left behind by the collapse of the timber and paper industries. Even after the assembly line stopped, the red and white logo still appeared at community events, church services, and on plastic tables during backyard family gatherings. But if Coca-Cola withdraws entirely from the South, the people of Bogaloosa won't just lose a brand, they'll lose the last thing that kept them in America's national conversation. In a town where the population has dwindled to just around 10,600 people, and poverty exceeds 30%, any symbol of national connection is precious. Not for its economic value, but for its value of presence. These symbols help people feel they still belong to something larger, that they haven't been forgotten. And for many years, Coca-Cola was that last thread of belief. If Coca-Cola disappears completely, the silence won't come from the absence of machinery. It will come from the feeling of being erased from culture. A town that was once a destination will become nothing more than a footnote. A place once proud of what it produced will be left asking, what's left to hold on to? And if a community that once embraced Coca-Cola as a spiritual symbol can be severed from it so invisibly, then look further north where memories are preserved in concrete glass and the curves of historic architecture, and ask, can anything truly last there either? Elmyra, New York. There are places where no sign is needed to speak history. In Elmyra, that place stands at the corner of Lake and East Market Streets, a 1939 Art Moderne style building that once housed a Coca-Cola bottling plant. Though its production line stopped long ago, the building remains a frozen block of memory amid the rush of modern life. To the people of Elmyra, it's not just an old structure, it's a reminder that this town once made things, it didn't just consume them. But times change, and what was once a source of pride now risks becoming an unnamed silence. If Coca-Cola fully withdraws from its community involvement in Elmyra, no more sponsoring local events, no more presence in schools, churches, festivals, then that building will no longer be a living symbol. It will be just a shell, an empty bottle that will never be refilled. With a population of over 26,000, Elmyra was once a beacon of upstate New York, a city where industry and community were linked like two halves of the same chain. But in recent years, Elmyra has struggled against erosion, a steadily shrinking population, a stagnant local economy, and a youth flight that feels like winter birds flying away with no return. In this context, Coca-Cola, even if now just a presence through community programs and a familiar logo, has remained the last thread connecting Elmyra to the industrial heartbeat of America. If Coca-Cola chooses to pull out entirely, Elmyra won't just lose a brand, it will lose a mirror. It will lose the ability to protect its own memory. Because once a symbol is no longer connected to the present, it ceases to be a legacy, it becomes a fossil. In a town where workers once drank Coke from metal lunch pails, where generations of families were tied to bottling and processing lines, the loss of Coca-Cola would feel like someone quietly removing the last photo from the living room wall. No words, no sound, just a vacancy that stings with absence. Elmyra has rebuilt before or after wars, after recessions, after regional economic collapses. But if even a symbol as familiar as Coca-Cola turns away, what's left to preserve the feeling that we were once part of something greater? And if a city once this resilient can be quietly pushed into the past with no promise of return, then look south where memory and festivity were once inseparable from a sweet, unmistakable flavor, now teetering on the edge of loss. Okala, Florida. In Okala, there are summer days so hot you just want to crawl into the shade, crack open a cold can of Coke, and let the fizz calm your entire mind. For many who've lived here since the 1940s, that memory isn't just a feeling, it's a ritual tied to the town since Coca-Cola built its first plant here back in 1939. That plant no longer operates, but the building still stands. And with it, a generation grew up believing Coca-Cola wasn't just a beverage, it was part of the community. Coke cans were passed around at school meetings, stashed in the trucks of Little League coaches, and chilled in coolers during every Tuscaloosa Park gathering. Coca-Cola didn't need to advertise in Okala, it was the air. So what happens if Coca-Cola cuts all ties with this town? Not a loud disaster, but a slow, silent fracture. A family diner stops ordering Coke because the supply chain is gone. A high school stadium changes sponsors. A generation of kids grows up without the sight of Coca-Cola woven into the town's memories, simply because Okala no longer shows up on the parent company's priority map. People in Okala don't ask for much. They don't need flashy product launches or trendy zero sugar cans. What they need is recognition, that their town still exists in the memory of an America changing by the day. And Coca-Cola, even if now only present through faded signs and echoes of festival banners, remains a fragile thread connecting Okala to the rest of this nation. When a brand becomes embedded in the life of a community, its departure isn't just a matter of moving a plant or switching distributors. It sends a deeper message. You don't belong anymore. And to those who still keep a Coke can from their 1971 wedding or remember working a part-time shift at the Coca-Cola warehouse back in high school, that message cuts cold. If Coca-Cola leaves, Okala won't collapse overnight, but it will feel emptier, lonelier, like a family photo missing its most familiar face, the one no one dares to talk about anymore. And if a place that once placed its full trust in the sweet taste of childhood can be left behind so quietly, then in a town where tradition is carved into wood, not just printed on cans, the loss won't stop at memory. It will ripple all the way into faith. Gadston, Alabama. Gadston was once the industrial symphony of Alabama. This small town on the Coosa River echoed with the sounds of trains' hammers and machines as if every day opened a new chapter in the story of a hardworking America. And woven into that rhythm was Coca-Cola. Since the mid-20th century, Gadston played a vital role in Coca-Cola's Southeast distribution chain. Not because it had a massive plant, but because it was a crossroads where railroads, highways, and willing hands came together to send crates of Coke deep into rural America. For the people of Gadston working for Coca-Cola, whether driving a truck, checking inventory, or managing a warehouse wasn't just a job. It was how they felt connected to the world beyond. But time never stands still. With the rise of automation, many once secure roles in Gadston disappeared. When Coca-Cola shifted its distribution hubs to larger metro areas in the late 1980s, the town lost a key part of its pulse. Yet at least the brand remained through small retailers, early morning delivery trucks, and hand-painted signs at old gas stations. If today Coca-Cola were to fully cut ties, Gadston wouldn't erupt in anger. It would simply feel sorrow, because what's being lost isn't a product, but the feeling of still being plugged into this country. In a town where over 25% of the population lives below the poverty line and where generations have cycled through blue-collar work, the departure of a national symbol feels like being quietly erased from the map without warning. For a place once called the Little Steel City of Alabama, losing service from a household name like Coca-Cola isn't just an economic setback, it's a loss of identity, a loss of that deeper belief we matter too. We're part of the bigger story. And if a town that once sweat and bled for America can be pushed aside so easily, then out west, where once thriving cities now also feel themselves slipping from the center of consumer focus, the coming unrest won't arrive as a crash, but as a quiet turning away. Houston, Texas. Houston has always been known as the city of oil of energy of relentless growth. But behind the skyscrapers and triple-decker freeways lies a silent working class. The people who keep the city running through habits that seem small on the surface. One of those habits is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola never made a market splash in Houston. Instead, it seeped into every truck stop, every corner store, every working-class neighborhood like a hidden bloodstream running through the city's daily consumer rhythm. When the Coca-Cola plant here shut down in 2020, many believed Houston was too big to feel the impact. They were wrong. Houston doesn't need Coca-Cola to survive, but it needs it to feel normal. And in a world shaped by the pandemic, inflation, and soaring prices, that feeling of normalcy has become a luxury. If Coca-Cola were to withdraw the rest of its presence from logistics, distribution, and commercial activity, what would be lost isn't a product, but a link in the chain of emotional stability. In a city where many families drive over 30 minutes just to find fair-priced groceries, losing a familiar brand isn't merely inconvenient. It's a sign that everything is leaving us. When something you used to see everywhere begins to vanish, you stop believing anything is permanent. People in Houston are used to handling hurricanes, gas prices, rising immigration, but they're not used to being cut out of the consumer map. And if Coca-Cola, the drink once stocked for every storm, evacuation, every church gathering, every garage fridge, also walks away, they'll know nothing is immune to the cold edge of change. Houston won't fall, but it will have to learn to live without a symbol that once quietly accompanied its every breath. And just a few hundred miles away, where a Coca-Cola facility was recently given tens of millions of dollars for expansion, yet the future remains more uncertain than ever, the lesson about trust will grow even more costly. San Antonio, Texas. In 2022, Coca-Cola announced a $42 million expansion at its San Antonio facility, a major investment that sparked hope for hundreds of working families. Locals didn't just welcome the news as a sign of economic growth. They saw it as a promise that San Antonio was still within the orbit of consumer America, still worthy of national icons choosing to invest, stay, and nurture roots. But trust is fragile. An investment without long-term commitment is like building a house on shifting sand. If Coca-Cola, under the pressure of rising production costs and a volatile supply chain, is forced to scale back or redirect its operations away from San Antonio, the deepest wounds won't be on the balance sheet. They'll be in the hearts of the people. San Antonio isn't like the congested metropolises. It's a blend of family tradition, religious life, a strong work ethic, and tight-knit community spirit. A can of Coke here isn't just a product, it's part of church picnics, family ceremonies, lunch breaks for laborers, and the survival of local diners that rely on generational habits of consumption. If Coca-Cola pulls out, San Antonio won't just lose an economic partner, it will lose something that made the people feel seen, remembered, and in a time when residents are grappling with inflation, housing shortages, and skyrocketing healthcare costs, that's a very real psychological blow. Not because Coca-Cola is a savior, but because it was once a quiet fixture in the ecosystem of trust. $42 million is a lot, but for the people of San Antonio, what's more valuable is the sense that their city is still worthy of keeping a piece of the American brand, rather than being deemed expendable at any moment. And if that withdrawal does come, it'll feel like a cold whisper, you were once chosen, but no longer. And in an America already struggling with economic turbulence and fractured trust, cities like San Antonio don't need to be overlooked again. What they need is a reason to believe that the things they've held onto from family and tradition to trusted brands still have a place in the future. Otherwise, all that may remain are empty Coke cans lined up in backyard garages, bitter reminders that once some symbols leave, they never return. When Coca-Cola pulls out, it doesn't just leave an empty space on the shelf, it leaves a quiet void in the American psyche. When a symbol that has accompanied generations begins to fade, it's no longer just about a drink, it's a much bigger question. What do we still have left in the whirlwind of change? Do you think your city might be next? If this video resonates with you, please like, comment, and subscribe to help us preserve the things that were never meant to be forgotten. This video is for analytical purposes only. It does not promote division or secession. We respect the Constitution of the United States and seek only to spark public dialogue from an independent perspective.